Chapter 6, Lesson 4, Essential Question. How can you rewrite a pair of fractions so that they have a common denominator? Up to this point, we have been adding and subtracting fractions that have like denominators. That means the same bottom number. So we know that 1/4 plus 1/4, we would keep our denominator same for 4 and just add the top, the numerator. So 1 plus 1 equals 2. However, and this would reduce down because 2 goes into both 2 and 4, so it would simplify to 1/2. However, we are not able to add 1/3 and 1/4 because they have different denominators. Today we're going to be practicing different ways of finding common denominators, so making equivalent fractions so that we can add them, because we're going to make different fractions that have the same denominator. To do this, we are going to have to work with multiples. And remember that a multiple is the number that is the product of another number. So like multiples of 4 would be 4, 8, 12, anything counting by 4. Unlock the problem. Sarah planted 2 one-acre gardens. One had 3 sections of flowers, and the other had 4 sections of flowers. She plans to divide both gardens into more sections so that they have the same number of equal-sized sections. How many sections will each garden have? Press pause, underline what you're being asked to find, and circle the important numbers. Remember, the numbers are sometimes written as words. You should have underlined how many sections will each garden have, circled 4, also the word 3, that's talking about the number of sections, and then I used a different color, but I underlined the same number of equal-sized sections because that's telling us what we need to do. That essentially we're going to be dividing, but at this point we're only worried about making the denominators. So one way to find a common denominator is to multiply the denominators. This is also known as the ECD, the easiest common denominator. To do that, we're multiplying the denominators, which our garden sections are divided into 1/3 and 1/4. That's where we had our 3 and our 4. One was 3 sections, one was 4 sections. And so we multiply the denominators to find a common denominator. So a common denominator of 1/3 and 1/4. Well, the denominators are 3 and 4. You multiply those together and you get the common denominator of 12. So then we need to write 1/3 and 1/4 as equivalent fractions, meaning they have the same value. They're just using different numbers, using the common denominator. So what did we have to do to this 3 to make it a 12? We had to multiply it times 4. And so we multiplied that times 4, and so we needed to multiply that 1 times 4. Okay, so 1 times 4 is 4. 3 times 4 is 12. Our first equivalent fraction is 4/12. So now we need to make 1/4 have the denominator of 12. What did we need to do to that 4 to make it 12? We had to multiply it times 3. So we also have to do that to the numerator. 1 times 3 equals 3, and 4 times 3 equals 12. So then, if we answer the question, both gardens will have how many sections? They're only asking for the common denominator. They will have 12 sections. Another way to look at this is to use a list. So if you start out and you make a list of the multiples, they ask for the first 8 non-zero multiples of 3 and 4. I would like you to press pause and fill in the multiples of 3 and 4. They start 3s with 3, 6, 9, fill in the rest, and then the multiples of 4, 4, 8, fill in the rest. So you should have just counted by 3 and 4 and filled them in. The next step is to circle the common multiples. So, well, I see right here that 12 is in common. And as I look, I also see that 24 is common. So now we need to use one of the common multiples as the common denominator and write equivalent fractions. So you can choose to have the denominator be 12, or you can choose for the denominator to be 24. Just whatever you do to one, you need to do to the other. Press pause and decide if you're going to use 12 as their denominator or 24, and then write in the equivalent fractions. So you had a choice. You could have used 12 as your denominator for both of them, and you would have ended up with 4/12 and 3/12. Or if you chose to use 24, you would have had to say, what did I multiply 3 by to get 24? I had to multiply it by 8, so I also had to multiply my top number by 8, so I'd get 8/24. And then with 1/4, you had to multiply 4 times 6 to get 24, so your numerator, so 6/24. That means that both gardens could have 12 or 24 sections. Right now, we're only talking about the denominator. Another way is still using your list, but finding what is called the least common denominator, which you find the least common multiple to find the least common denominator. They're the same thing, just a denominator is in a fraction. So we're finding the least common denominator of 2 or more fractions by finding the least common multiple. So, looking at our example, we're going to find the least common denominator of 3/4 and 1/6. We're going to use the least common denominator to write equivalent fractions for each fraction. So step 1 is to list multiples. I want you to list at least 6 for the 4 and 6 for the 6. Press pause and write your list. Now that you have your list, you can look and see which ones they have in common. So I can tell that 4 and 6 have 12 in common and 24. But in this case, I don't want to worry about both of them. I want the least. Which one is the least? That would be 12. And so the least common denominator for 3/4 and 1/6 is going to be 12. Now we are going to use that 12 to write equivalent fractions. And so we need to think what number multiplied by the denominator of the fraction will result in the least common denominator. So basically they're saying, what did I need to do to this 4 to make it a 12? Well, I had to times it by 3. So I also have to times the numerator by 3. So 3 times 3 equals 9, and then 4 times 3 equals 12. And now, because we still want 12 on our bottom, what did we have to do to the 6 to make it a 12? We had to multiply 6 times 2 to get us a 12, so that means we also need to multiply the numerator. So 1 times 2 equals 2, and 6 times 2 equals 12. So that means that 3/4 can be rewritten as 9/12, and that 1/6 can be rewritten as 2/12. Or 1/6 can be rewritten as 2/12. Looking at the share and show, number 1 walks you through the steps of finding the common denominator between 6 and 9, and then rewriting the fractions using the common denominator. So you should have the denominator, and you can use any strategy you want. You can use multiplying or the ECD. You can use multiplying the denominators, or you can use the LCM, the lowest common multiple. It is your choice on the strategy that you use. For numbers 2, 3, 4, and 5, 6, and 7, what you are going to do is you're going to use one of the strategies that you choose to find a common denominator for just the denominators, the 3 and the 5 and number 2, and you're going to write down what that denominator will be, and then on this line you're going to write down what the equivalent fractions would be. So you may go ahead and press pause and work on the share and show problems 1 through 7. If you still have questions throughout this, please raise your hand. So press pause and you may begin. For number 1, they tell you to multiply to get the denominator, so you should have ended up with 54. And then multiplied times this first fraction times 9 over 54, and the second fraction times 6 to get 6 over 54. As I show possible answers for the share and show, I will tell you whether I use the easiest common denominator by multiplying or the lowest common denominators using the lowest common multiple as I'm doing it, because you'll see that sometimes one is better than the other. And so if I use the ECD, I will have it in red, and if I use the multiple, it will be in blue. And I will also show you the factor tree that I used. Number 2 is the ECD, the easiest one, multiplying 3 times 5. It also is essentially the lowest common multiple. Number 3, the common denominator is 9, and I could easily see that because I knew that 3 went into 9, so I didn't even need to do my factor tree, but that's what it would look like. If I had done the easiest one, where with multiplying, it would have been 27. On number 45, or 4, I used the lowest common multiple because I did not want to multiply 9 times 15 in my head. So I figured I'd factor it out, and I found 45. So I had to multiply 9 times 5 to get 45, and then 15 times 3 to get 45. And then I multiplied the numerators the same way. On number 5, I saw right away that 8 is a multiple of 4, so I just needed to make the 1/4 have a denominator of 8, so I left my 3/8 and multiplied my 1/4 each part by 2, so 2/8 with the common denominator of 8. Number 6 was again another lowest or least common denominator, so 24. And number 7 is the easy one with just multiplying the two together. It's also the least common multiple, but it is going to be 30 with 24/30ths and 5/30ths. So if you got all these right, go ahead, fill out your exit ticket, and work on the on your own and problem solving. If you still had some trouble, go back and try again, and raise your hand if you still need help.